The Hollow Armada. The Silent Attack. Captain Juno Black stared at the endless expanse of the outer belt, a vast stretch of space filled with nothing but the black void and the distant light of stars. Her ship, the Stellar Fury, hummed steadily as it glided past countless asteroids and debris, a sharp contrast to the eerie silence surrounding them. The distress call had been brief, almost desperate, with no explanation of what had happened. The message had come from a small mining colony located on the third moon of a gas giant. It was one of many colonies that had sprung up in the outer belt, but it was the first time Juno had received a call from them. When she had heard the tremor in the voice on the other end, she knew something was wrong. The colony's name was Osiris Station, and it had been silent for hours before the call came through. As the Stellar Fury neared the colony, the usual hum of the engines was drowned out by the deafening stillness. The colony's orbiting satellite came into view, spinning slowly in space, its surface covered in what appeared to be damage, scratches, burns, and a faint, sickly green glow. Juno frowned, her mind racing. Something wasn't right. The station had a reputation for being well defended. Whoever had attacked it would need to be powerful, efficient, and ruthless. The crew, alert as always, prepared for an immediate landing. There was a slight unease in the air, an unspoken tension that came with stepping into the unknown. Landing coordinates locked, Captain, Lieutenant Reyes said from the control panel. His voice, normally calm and steady, now carried a slight tremor. He, like everyone else aboard, could feel the weight of the unknown pressing down on them. Juno took a deep breath and gave the order. Engage landing sequence. Prepare for immediate entry. As the Stellar Fury descended toward Osiris Station, the crew began their scans. Nothing could have prepared them for what they would find. The colony's once bustling cities were now ghostly ruins. Buildings that had once hummed with the life of workers and families were silent, their windows dark, their doors wide open. The colony's landing pad, where cargo ships usually unloaded resources, was now covered in dust, as though abandoned long ago. There were no signs of life. No bodies, no survivors, no sounds of movement. Report, Juno ordered, her voice sharp. Her stomach churned as she looked over the station's surface from the viewports. The eerie stillness hung in the air like a thick fog. Lieutenant Reyes' face tightened as he scanned the area. Captain, there's no sign of enemy ships, nothing on the sensors. Juno stared at the screen. The colony was a mess, but the lack of any enemy presence was unsettling. If they had been attacked, there should have been evidence of shipwrecks, wreckage, or even energy signatures. Instead, there was nothing. It was as though the place had simply ceased to exist. Keep scanning, Juno ordered. There has to be something. As the ship's sensors panned across the station's exterior, something caught Juno's eye. A glimmer of movement, a shadow darting past the corner of one of the distant buildings. Her heart skipped a beat. Could it be a survivor? Hold position, Juno said quickly. Send out a ground team. Reyes, take Ensign Tyler and Officer Vargas with you. Reyes nodded, quickly preparing the team. Juno watched as they suited up and began their descent toward the surface. She turned to the rest of the crew. I don't like this, she murmured. Something's off here. The crew's unease was palpable as they watched the team's descent through the large viewport. A few moments passed before the ground team's signal flickered on the communication system. Captain, we've landed. Reyes' voice crackled over the speaker. We're entering the main hub. No sign of life yet. Just debris. Juno kept her eyes trained on the screen, waiting for any sign of progress. But the silence stretched on. As the ground team moved deeper into the colony, strange things started happening. It began with small, almost imperceptible glitches, static over the comm system, strange power surges in the lights, and an eerie noise that couldn't be placed. It was a low hum, almost like whispers coming from the walls themselves. Suddenly, Ensign Tyler's voice came over the comm. Captain, there's something wrong. The station's power cord is still online, but there's no crew, no bodies. It's as if they just vanished. Juno felt a cold shiver run down her spine. The station's reactors were running at full capacity, but no one was there to operate them. There were no signs of forced entry, no signs of struggle. It was as if the entire colony had just evaporated. "Stay sharp," Juno replied, her tone tight. "Find anything that could explain what happened. We need answers." Then the unthinkable happened. The crew aboard the Stellar Fury began to hear the whispers too. At first, it was just faint voices, indistinguishable from the usual hum of the ship. But as the crew's unease grew, so did the voices. Captain Black stepped to the command center, her eyes scanning the empty halls of the ship. Something was wrong. The air felt heavier, thicker with tension. The crew shifted uneasily at their stations, their faces pale, their hands trembling. It wasn't just the empty colony that was making them feel this way. It was something on board, something unseen. "Captain, we're picking up something on the sensors," Lieutenant Reyes said suddenly, his voice strained. "Massive fleet detected. They're heading straight for another colony in the sector." Juno turned to face the screen. The sensors were lit up with an enormous number of ships, their signatures flickering and fluctuating. But there was something odd about them. They weren't quite solid. They didn't register as physical ships. They were like shadows on the radar, empty, hollow. "What the hell are they?" Juno murmured, her pulse quickening. Her instincts screamed at her to leave. But it was too late. The fleet was already on the move, closing in fast. "Captain," Reyes said, his voice trembling now, "they're not normal ships. There's no crew, no life signs." As Juno's mind raced, a horrifying realization began to form. The ships weren't uncrewed. They were alive. They were some kind of entity. And they were feeding. "Get us out of here now," Juno shouted. "Full power, engage the jump drive." But the Stellar Fury wasn't fast enough. The enemy ships appeared on their radar, not as distant specks, but as vast, dark shapes moving rapidly toward them. No energy blasts, no weapons fire, but the feeling of dread that washed over the ship was palpable. The terror itself was the weapon. Juno ordered an immediate evacuation, but as the crew scrambled to get to the escape pods, the first shot rang out. A deafening sound filled the ship's hull, and the lights flickered. The Stellar Fury shuddered under the impact, the walls groaning. The chase had begun. With their ship wounded but still intact, Juno made her decision. "We're going to outrun them," she said, her voice cold and steady. "Prepare for a jump. Hold on." The crew braced themselves as Juno pushed the ship to maximum power, the engines roaring to life as they rocketed toward the safety of the outer edges of the sector. But the enemy ships were relentless. As the first rift opened, and they began to jump, Juno knew this was just the beginning of a nightmare. Captain Juno Black gripped the controls tightly as the Stellar Fury tore through space, the engine hum vibrating beneath her feet. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The attack by the Hollow Armada, the eerie whispers in the dark, the overwhelming feeling of dread. Everything was escalating faster than she could process. She looked out the viewport, but there was nothing but the endless void of space, an ocean of dark silence. Yet she could feel it, the pressure mounting inside the ship, creeping into the hearts of her crew. The fear was palpable. It hung in the air like a fog, thick and suffocating, and it was growing stronger with every passing moment. "We're approaching the station, Captain," Lieutenant Reyes said, his voice tight with unease. Juno nodded, trying to focus on the task at hand. They were heading to a nearby station, a place that might offer some shelter or answers. She had to hold it together, for the crew, for herself. But as they neared the station, something felt off. The ship's systems flickered, the lights dimmed for a moment, and then surged back to full power. "Something's wrong with the power grid," Officer Vargas muttered, tapping at her console. "Check it out," Juno ordered, her voice cold. "We need to get to that station." The stellar fury slowed as they approached the docking bay. The station loomed in the distance, an old, rusted outpost on the edge of the belt. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. They needed a place to regroup and figure out what to do next. As they docked, the crew could feel the weight of their isolation pressing down on them. The station's air was stale, and the lights flickered in a way that sent chills down Juno's spine. But what unsettled her the most was the crew. They were on edge, more than usual. Every small noise seemed to set them off. Every shadow cast by the flickering lights made them jump. Juno stepped off the ship, her boots echoing on the metal floor. The station was eerily quiet, too quiet. The usual hum of life support systems and the clatter of workers didn't exist here. It felt abandoned, but the station was operational. There were no signs of life, no crew members. It was as though the people who had worked here had simply vanished. "Captain, this place is a ghost town," Rice said, his voice tinged with fear. "There's no one here. What the hell happened?" Juno didn't have the answer. She could only feel the growing tension in her chest, the ever-present whispering of fear that seemed to come from every corner of the station. It wasn't just the absence of people that was unnerving. It was the feeling that something was lurking just beyond the surface, something waiting to consume them. She motioned for the crew to follow her as they moved deeper into the station, the silence oppressive. Every step felt like it was taking them further into the heart of the unknown. The further they went, the more the whispers grew louder. It wasn't just the ship or the station anymore. It was the very air around them, filled with fear, eating away at them from the inside. "Captain, we're picking up something strange on the station's sensors," Vargas said, her voice cracking. "There's a huge energy signature, like nothing I've ever seen. And it's moving toward us." Juno's heart skipped a beat. She knew what that meant. The Hollow Armada wasn't far behind. But what was worse was the growing sense that they weren't just chasing them anymore. The ships were feeding on the fear, using it to grow stronger with each encounter. "What the hell are we dealing with?" Rice asked, his voice barely a whisper. Juno felt the weight of his question settle in her chest. She didn't have an answer. Not yet. They continued their search, but with every turn, they found nothing. No bodies, no evidence of what had happened. The crew's fear was spreading. It wasn't just the whispers now. It was a deep, unsettling terror that clung to them, sinking into their bones. The crew members exchanged nervous glances, their movements sharp and jittery. Juno knew she had to act fast before the fear completely overtook them. She needed information. They needed answers. "Raise, Vargas, go to the central control room," Juno ordered. "Find out what happened here. I'll stay on the comms." The two officers nodded, and they hurried off. Juno turned back to the viewport, her eyes narrowing as she watched the distant stars. The stellar fury was safe for now, but the Hollow Armada wasn't done. The station, the colony, they were just the beginning. There was something bigger going on, something that connected all these attacks. As the minutes dragged on, Juno felt the dread settle deeper into her stomach. It wasn't just the empty stations and the hollow ships that scared her. It was the realization that the Hollow Armada wasn't a random enemy. It was a force, a weapon created by someone, or something, far older than she could comprehend. "Captain, you need to hear this." Raya's voice crackled through her comm. "We found something. It's not good." Juno's heart raced. "What did you find?" "Records," Vargas said, her voice shaking. "They're old, really old, but they tell a story. The Hollow Armada. It was created by a long-lost race, one that used fear as a weapon. They were trying to control entire galaxies. These ships aren't just ships. They're living entities, feeding off the terror they cause." Juno's mind spun as she processed the information. A race that used fear as a weapon. Living ships. It was madness. But as the pieces began to fall into place, she realized just how dangerous the situation was. The ships were designed to terrorize. Vargas continued. They feed on fear, and the more fear they generate, the stronger they become. They're not just machines, they're predators. Juno stood there in stunned silence. She had to stop them. She had to stop them before they reached Earth. But how? The comms crackled again, pulling her from her thoughts. Captain, the energy signature is getting stronger. They're here. The Hollow Armada is coming for us. Juno's mind raced. The fear was spreading fast. Her crew was on the edge, their nerves fraying with every passing second. They couldn't stay here. Not when the Armada was closing in. But if they ran, where would they go? How could they fight something that fed on their fear? She had to make a decision. And fast. Everyone, back to the ship, Juno barked. We're leaving. We'll figure this out once we're back in deep space. We can't fight them here. But even as she gave the orders, Juno knew it wouldn't be that easy. The Hollow Armada wasn't just after them. They were after everything. And they would keep coming, feeding off the fear until there was nothing left. As the crew made their way back to the Stellar Fury, Juno's mind raced. She couldn't let them reach Earth. She couldn't let them reach the heart of humanity. But what if there was no way to stop them? With the sound of her boots echoing down the metal corridor, Juno made her decision. The only way to save humanity was to face the Hollow Armada, and she would have to do it on her terms. The chase was just beginning. Captain Juno Black stood on the command bridge of the Stellar Fury, her hands clenched tight around the railing. The ship hummed beneath her feet, its systems running at full power, but it felt like there was a storm inside the hull. A storm that wasn't just electrical but emotional. The crew's fear had reached critical levels, and with each passing minute, the Hollow Armada grew closer. Their whispers were becoming louder, a constant nagging presence at the back of her mind. Captain, Lieutenant Reyes spoke, his voice strained. We need to do something. If we don't fight back soon, we're going to break. Juno turned to face him. I know. Her voice was steady, but she couldn't ignore the truth. They were all on the edge, walking a razor-thin line between survival and total collapse. She had been thinking about their situation every minute since they escaped the station. The Hollow Armada was relentless. It wasn't just an enemy fleet, it was something far worse. Something alive. The ships, the fear, they were feeding off the crew's anxiety, growing stronger with every confrontation. The paranoia was getting to all of them. We can't keep running, she said, her voice firm, though her mind was in turmoil. We need a weapon, something that can stop them. But the solution, the weapon, was buried deep inside the ship's eye. Fragments of knowledge from a race long lost to time. Juno had been given access to this knowledge in the past, a series of hidden files from an extinct species who had mastered the art of using fear as a weapon. There was one thing they had discovered that might just be the key: the Echo Stone. The Echo Stone was said to have the power to neutralize fear, to block the energy that the Hollow Armada fed on. But it wasn't something they could simply turn on. It was an artifact, hidden in a forbidden sector of the galaxy, a place so dangerous, even the remnants of the ship's eye had warnings flashing across its systems, telling them not to go there. Still, Juno had no choice. They had to take that risk. The Echo Stone was their only hope. Activate the coordinates, Juno ordered. We're heading to the Echo Stone. As the ship began to change course, the AI's voice came through the comm system. Warning: proceeding to the Forbidden Zone will result in potential emotional instability. Fear levels will be at critical levels for all crew members. Juno didn't respond. She didn't have time for hesitation. The journey to the Forbidden Sector was long, and as the Stellar Fury pushed deeper into this unknown space, the atmosphere inside the ship became thicker. The crew grew more agitated. Every creak of the hull seemed louder, more ominous. Shadows danced in the corners of their vision. The whispers, The very same whispers that had haunted them since the attack grew louder. It was as though the ship itself was alive, feeding on their fear. By the time they reached the edge of the forbidden zone, every crew member was on edge. The air was charged with an unspoken dread, a collective anxiety that seemed to grow with each passing minute. Juno could feel it too, the creeping unease, the visions that began to dance at the edges of her mind. But she couldn't stop now. She couldn't back down. They had to find the Echo Stone. "Captain," Vargas spoke from her post, "we're getting strange readings. There's something out there. Something. Alive." Juno's breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean, alive?" "It's hard to say," Vargas replied, her fingers moving swiftly over the console. "But it's like the entire sector is pulsing with energy, like a living thing. I've never seen anything like it." Juno's heart pounded in her chest. The closer they got, the worse the fear became. And it wasn't just the crew. It was her too. Deep down, she knew that whatever was out there would force them to confront something they weren't ready for. A moment later, they emerged into the heart of the forbidden zone. The space around them was dark, unnaturally dark, like the very stars themselves had been swallowed. In the distance, an eerie glow pulsed faintly. The Echo Stone was near, but so was something far more sinister, a presence that pushed against her mind like a weight. Suddenly, a vision slammed into Juno's consciousness. She was back on Earth, standing in front of the council, her uniform pristine, her face a mask of determination. She could hear their voices, cold and accusing. "You failed us, Captain." The memory crashed over her, the feelings of failure, of not being good enough. She tried to shake it off, but the vision intensified. Her heart beat faster, her palms grew sweaty, and for a split second, she almost felt as if she were back there, back in that moment of complete and utter defeat. "Captain," Rai shouted, breaking through the haze of her vision. "We've got company." Juno blinked, trying to focus. She was back on the stellar fury, not on Earth. The fear was trying to break her, trying to twist her mind into something it wasn't. But she had to push through. They all had to. "Set a course for the Echo Stone," she barked, shaking off the remnants of her vision. "We need that artifact. Now." As they approached the source of the glow, Juno's fears grew louder, more intrusive. She could feel the weight of her past failures trying to pull her under. It wasn't just her. Every crew member was struggling, each of them battling their own personal demons. Their minds were being tested. Their hearts were being torn apart by the very fear they sought to escape. Then they found it. The Echo Stone. It stood in the center of an ancient ruin, glowing softly, pulsing with a strange, calming energy. It seemed to hum in the silence of space, as though it was calling to them. But just as they were about to approach, the ship's sensors screamed with alarm. The Hollow Armada had found them, braced for impact. Juno shouted, her voice cracking as the ship was rocked by the sudden barrage of energy from the Armada ships. The Hollow Armada had caught up with them, and they weren't about to let go. "We have to activate the Echo Stone, now," Vargas screamed. Juno's heart hammered in her chest. The artifact was right there, within reach, but they were under attack. If they didn't act fast, the Hollow Armada would tear them apart before they had a chance. "Captain," Reyes yelled again, his face pale with fear. "The stone is our only hope. We can't leave without it." Juno stood frozen for a moment, her mind racing. She had to make a choice. Activate the Echo Stone now and risk everything, or retreat into unknown space, and pray that the Hollow Armada wouldn't catch up. Her hands trembled as she moved toward the console. "Activate it," Juno commanded. But as the system began to process the command, the ship was struck by another powerful blast. The lights flickered, and the stellar fury shuddered under the weight of the assault. They had no time. The choice was made, and now there was no turning back. The stellar fury shuddered violently as the energy from the Echo Stone surged through the ship. Sparks flew from the control panels, and the lights flickered before plunging the entire crew into darkness. Captain Juno Black stood on the command deck, her heart pounding in her chest. The rift they had opened, using the Echo Stone, was not what she had expected. It was far worse. The ship was caught in a vortex of pure, unfiltered fear, and she could feel it seeping into her very bones. "Captain, the rift is growing," Vargas shouted, her voice trembling with terror. "We're being pulled in." Juno gritted her teeth. "Hold steady," she commanded, her voice firm despite the unease spreading through her. The stellar fury was drifting into unknown space, pulled by the dark, invisible force that had opened before them. The glowing Echo Stone had unleashed something far more dangerous than they had ever anticipated. The energy from the artifact wasn't neutralizing the Hollow Armada, it was feeding it, strengthening it. The rift itself pulsed like a living thing, dark and chaotic, stretching far beyond the ship's sensors. The walls of the command deck were distorted by the distortion in space. Strange whispers echoed through the hull, like distant voices, calling out names. The air grew heavy, thick with an unexplainable dread. "Everyone, stay calm," Juno ordered, though her own words sounded hollow even to her. Fear was beginning to creep into her thoughts, and she had to push it back. She couldn't afford to lose control. Not now. Not when they were so close. The ship trembled again as the rift's pull increased. The walls seemed to twist and bend, and the lights flickered back on, revealing the crew's strained faces. Fear was etched into every expression. But it wasn't just the ship that was changing. The crew was too. The dread was alive in them. The rift was feeding on their fear, just like it had done to the colonies they had visited. "Captain, it's feeding on us," Ray said, his voice unsteady. "The more we're afraid, the stronger it gets." Juno felt it, like an icy hand wrapping around her heart, squeezing it with every passing second. Fear had always been a part of her, a constant companion ever since her first mission as a young officer. She had learned to control it, to push it aside. But now it was clawing at her, harder than ever before. "Keep moving forward," Juno shouted, her voice breaking the silence. "We have to reach the other side of the rift. We have no choice." But the stellar fury was buckling under the strain of the rift. The ship's systems were malfunctioning, power surges coursing through the wires. The ship's AI flickered to life, a distorted voice barely audible over the roar of the disturbance. "Warning, instability, approaching critical levels, cannot sustain the rift's energy." Juno's mind raced. They couldn't keep going like this. Every moment in the rift made them weaker, more vulnerable to the Hollow Armada, and it was only a matter of time before their ship collapsed under the pressure. They had to escape, or find a way to neutralize the rift itself. But how? "Captain," Vargas said softly, her voice filled with a strange dread. "We're not alone." Juno's stomach dropped. She turned to see Vargas staring at the view screen. It wasn't just the rift they were drifting through. It was something else. Shadowy shapes, like ghostly figures, appeared at the edges of the rift. They flickered in and out of existence, like half-formed memories. At first, Juno thought it was a trick of the light, a distortion from the rift. But as the shadows grew clearer, she recognized them. They were figures from her past, people she had known, people she had failed. Her father, standing tall and proud, his stern expression never faltering, even as she had been too afraid to speak up. Her old captain from her first mission, a mentor who had taught her everything she knew, now staring at her with disappointed eyes. Even her younger self appeared, her face filled with the uncertainty and fear she had struggled to hide. "Captain," Ray said, his voice trembling, "they're not real. It's the rift. It's showing us things, our fears." But Juno couldn't move. She was paralyzed, staring at the figure of her father. The disappointment in his eyes was like a weight on her chest. He was angry at her, angry for failing him, angry for being weak. "Juno," her father's voice echoed through the rift. It was distorted, like it was coming from miles away. yet it felt close enough to touch. "Juno," the voice repeated, growing louder, more insistent. "You failed them. You failed me." Juno shook her head, trying to push the voice out of her mind. It wasn't real. It couldn't be. She had to focus. She had to remain strong. But the rift was feeding on her doubt, her guilt, her fear. It was taking everything she had left. And she could feel herself slipping. "Captain, we need to go," Vargas shouted, snapping Juno out of her trance. Juno blinked and looked around. The shadows were gone, but the fear was still there, thick in the air. The rift was pulling them deeper into its grip, twisting the very fabric of reality around them. Every corner of the ship seemed to pulse with a life of its own, as if the ship itself was afraid. "This isn't just a rift," Juno whispered to herself. "It's a trap, a prison." Her heart sank as the realization hit her. The Echo Stone wasn't a weapon. It was a lure, a trap designed to pull anyone who activated it into this nightmare realm of fear. It was the very thing the Hollow Armada had been waiting for, a place where fear was not just a tool but a sustenance, a place where fear could grow stronger with every moment. Juno turned to face the crew. "We have to get out of here. Now." But the ship's alarms blared, signaling a new threat. The Hollow Armada had followed them into the rift. "We're not alone," Reyes yelled. "The Armada's here." Juno's heart raced. The ghostly ships from the Hollow Armada were emerging from the rift, their dark, skeletal forms appearing out of the swirling chaos. They were feeding off the fear the rift created, growing stronger, more menacing with each passing second. "We have to stop them," Juno shouted, desperation creeping into her voice. "We can't let them get any stronger." But the rift was pulling them in. The ship was already starting to destabilize. The walls groaned as if the very bones of the stellar fury were being stretched and torn apart. The ship lurched again, and this time, the alarms weren't just a warning. They were the sound of something breaking. Juno clenched her fists. "Activate the emergency protocols. We have to get out of here, or we'll be trapped forever." But as the ship lurched again, she realized they might already be too late. The rift was consuming them. And if they couldn't break free, they would be trapped in this dimension of fear for all eternity. The Hollow Armada was closing in, and the rift was pulling them deeper into the abyss. Time was running out. Juno had one last chance to save her crew and herself. But would she be able to escape the terror before it consumed them all? The answer was still unclear, but one thing was certain. The battle for survival was far from over. The stellar fury groaned under the strain of the rift, and Captain Juno Black felt a surge of dread tighten in her chest. Every step she took on the command deck was heavier than the last. The walls of the ship pulsed with a rhythm of their own, as if the ship was alive, breathing in sync with the terrible force pulling them further into the void. The Hollow Armada was closing in. Their ghostly ships were mere shadows now, looming like vultures, hungry for the fear that hung thick in the air. Juno's hands trembled slightly as she gripped the command chair, her knuckles white. Fear was everywhere. The crew could feel it too. It was in their eyes, in their voices. Paranoia had set in. The rift was doing its work, feeding on their deepest anxieties, twisting them into tangible, monstrous forms. "Captain," Vargas said, her voice cracking. "We're losing control of the ship, the systems." Before Vargas could finish, the lights flickered, and the room was bathed in an eerie red glow. The crew froze, their eyes widening as the ship's walls rippled like water disturbed by a stone. From the walls, figures emerged. Shadows, dark, distorted versions of the crew. Their faces were twisted, their eyes filled with rage and torment. "Get back," Reyes shouted, pulling out his blaster, but the figures were already charging toward them. Juno's heart skipped a beat as she recognized the first figure. It was her old commanding officer, Captain Marlowe. His face was distorted in a grotesque sneer, his once kind eyes now burning with anger. "Juno," he snarled, his voice echoing in the room. "You left us. You abandoned us. Juno's stomach twisted. She had been a young officer when she had failed Marlowe, hesitating in a crucial moment that led to his death during a mission. The guilt had haunted her for years. She had never forgiven herself. Marlowe lunged at her, but Juno instinctively raised her hand, feeling the weight of the echo stone, now glowing on her wrist. She needed to act. She couldn't let the fear consume her. But the manifestations didn't stop there. Figures appeared everywhere. Her former team, each one distorted and corrupted by the rift's power. Her first friend, Lana, turned into a monstrous version of herself, her face full of malice and accusation. "You always made the hard choices, didn't you, Juno?" Lana's voice was sharp, like a blade. "And look where it got us." "Shut up," Juno screamed, backing away from the terrifying specter of her past. But the figure kept advancing, its twisted grin growing wider. "You left me to die. You couldn't even save yourself." Juno pressed her hands to her head. She couldn't think. The rift was breaking her down. The fear was overwhelming. She had to fight it. She had to stop it from swallowing her whole. But every whisper, every distorted memory, every haunting figure clawed at her. Suddenly, a voice broke through her fog of terror. It was Vargas, calling to her. "Captain, focus. You have to break free from this." Juno looked up, and her gaze locked onto the crew. They were all there, each one fighting their own personal demons. Rise, struggling against the version of himself that mocked his failures. Vargas, fighting her own fear of being abandoned once again. They were all suffering in their own way, each one trapped in the same cycle of terror. "Juno," Vargas said, her voice filled with fear, but also with determination. "You have to lead us. You're the only one who can stop this." Juno's heart pounded in her chest as she realized the truth. The fear they were all experiencing, the fear the rift was feeding on, was real. But it wasn't invincible. It could be overcome. If she could overcome her own fears, she could help the crew do the same. Juno stepped forward, her breath shallow, as the figure of Marlowe advanced toward her. She faced it head-on. "I didn't abandon you," she said, her voice surprisingly steady despite the dread gnawing at her. "I failed, yes, but I didn't abandon you, and I will never abandon anyone again." The figure stopped, its angry sneer slowly twisting into something more sorrowful. It began to dissipate into mist, fading away. But the other figures were closing in. Juno clenched her fist around the echo stone. She could feel it pulsing with energy, drawing from the fear around her, feeding on it. But now it felt different. She realized what she had to do. She couldn't just suppress the fear. She had to confront it, embrace it, and let it guide her. "Everyone, listen to me," Juno shouted, her voice rising with authority. "The fear you're feeling, it's not just in your heads. It's real, but it's not unbeatable. We are stronger than this." She stepped into the heart of the room, feeling the weight of the rift pressing in around her. "We need to face our fears, all of us, together. Only then can we stop the Hollow Armada." The crew hesitated, their fear evident in their eyes. But Juno stood firm, her expression resolute. "I'm not asking you to be fearless. I'm asking you to fight, to overcome, to take back control." For a moment, the crew was still, the terror pressing down on them. But then something shifted. Rise nodded, a determined look on his face. Vargas, though shaking, stood straighter, holding her weapon with renewed purpose. One by one, the crew began to fight back against the manifestations of their fears. The dark figures started to fade as the crew fought off their fears. But Juno knew the hardest battle was yet to come. She had to confront the fear that had followed her the longest, the fear of losing her crew. As the last of the twisted shadows faded, Juno felt herself grow stronger. But then she heard it again. A voice, soft, almost inaudible, but it was unmistakable. "Juno, you're going to lose them. You're going to lose them all." Her own voice, the voice that had haunted her for years. Juno closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She couldn't ignore the fear anymore. She had to face it. "You're wrong," she whispered to the voice, her voice steady. "I'm not afraid of losing them. I'm not afraid of losing anyone." Suddenly, she felt a surge of power from the Echo Stone. The fear that had once ruled her heart was now something she controlled. The ship trembled as the rift began to destabilize, and she knew it was time. Time to end this nightmare. With one final, decisive motion, Juno activated the Echo Stone, pushing all the fear back. The ship shuddered violently, and for a brief moment, it felt like everything was about to collapse. The walls groaned, and the lights flickered. But then, everything went still. The rift began to close, its grip weakening. The Hollow Armada was pushed back. For a moment, the crew was silent, still processing the weight of what had just happened. Juno's breath was ragged, but she couldn't help the small smile that tugged at the corner of her lips. They had done it. They had survived. For now. But the victory came with a cost. The ship's systems began to fail. Sparks flew from the control panels, and the ship groaned again as it started to break apart. "We need to get out of here," Vargas said urgently. Now, the Hollow Armada wasn't done. They had only bought themselves a few moments. Juno nodded, her resolve firm. "Hold on. We're not done yet." But the Hollow Armada was coming. And this time, they would be ready. The Stellar Fury was in a state of chaos. Its hull was being torn apart, metal screeching in protest as it shuddered violently under the weight of the psychic waves crashing against it. Sparks flew from the exposed circuits, and the air was thick with tension. The crew scrambled to hold their ground as the ship was being slowly consumed by the very fear they had been fighting. Captain Juno Black stood at the helm, her face hard and unyielding. She knew this was their final chance. There was no going back now. If they couldn't stop the Hollow Armada here, everything they had fought for would be lost. The entire galaxy would fall under the sway of an ancient, terrifying force. "Captain," Vargas's voice broke through the noise. "We're almost there. The central ship. We're approaching it." Juno's grip tightened on the console. Her mind raced. They had entered the heart of the fear-driven dimension, a place where reality itself seemed to bend and twist. The closer they got to the central ship, the stronger the fear became. The walls of the ship seemed to close in on them, and every surface flickered with nightmarish images. The crew's worst fears were being brought to life in front of their eyes. Reyes, standing at the gun station, was the first to crack. His face turned pale, and his hand shook violently as the memories of a failed mission, his friends dying in his arms, came rushing back. He staggered, barely able to keep his footing. "I can't do this, Captain," he whispered, his voice trembling. Vargas was next. The images of her lost family flashed in her mind, and she collapsed to the floor, clutching her head as though she could erase them. "It's too much," she gasped, tears streaming down her face. But Juno didn't have time to console them. She didn't have time to break down herself. There was only one thing left to do: destroy the entity at the heart of the Hollow Armada. "Focus," Juno commanded, her voice strong. "We've made it this far. We can't turn back now. We fight through this together." Her words didn't completely erase the fear, but they steadied the crew just enough to keep going. Together, they'd reached the central ship, a massive dark shape that loomed like a shadow in the heart of the fear dimension. The psychic waves grew stronger as they approached. Juno could feel her own fears pressing against her mind, visions of her past failures creeping into the corners of her thoughts. The weight of it all was almost too much, but she refused to succumb. She had to keep moving forward, for her crew, for Earth. As they breached the central ship's proximity, the very air inside the Stellar Fury seemed to distort. The walls flickered and shimmered, and the crew began to see things. Terrible things. Vargas was the first to scream, her eyes wide with terror as she saw her family. Her children, lost to the enemy. Rice could barely stand as he saw the faces of his fallen comrades, twisted in agony, blaming him for their deaths. Juno, too, saw her own nightmare. The faces of the crew, her friends, twisted in fear and pain, all reaching out to her. They blamed her for leading them into this mess. "Don't listen to them," she told herself, her voice hoarse. "Don't give in." But the pressure was growing unbearable. She could feel the entity at the heart of the ship, a psychic presence so overwhelming that it seemed to fill every corner of the ship. It was like a wall of darkness pressing against her mind, trying to break her. And then it spoke. Captain Black. The voice echoed inside her mind, soft at first, like a whisper, but it grew louder, more forceful. "You think you can stop me. You think you can defeat me." The voice wasn't just in her mind. It was in her soul. She could feel the weight of it, the crushing power of fear. "I have consumed entire worlds," the entity continued, its voice now booming in her head. "I am the fear you cannot escape, the terror that haunts every living being." Juno shook her head, trying to block it out. She couldn't let this thing break her. She couldn't. "I won't give up," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. "You have no choice," the voice taunted. "You and your crew are nothing. You are weak. You will fall, just like all the others." But Juno pushed forward, refusing to listen. The voice was getting louder, stronger, pressing against her mind until it felt like it was going to crush her. She had to stop it. She had to. And then she saw it. The entity revealed itself. It was not an alien. It was not a machine. It was something worse. It was a psychic creature, born from the collective fears of the civilizations it had consumed. It was a being of pure fear, its form shifting and flickering in the air like a nightmare given life. The Echo Stone hadn't been a weapon. It had been a prison, a way to contain this creature. But now that the prison was broken, the entity was free. "You cannot defeat me," the entity said, its voice now resonating deep inside her chest. "I am fear itself, and you, Captain Black, are just another victim." Juno took a deep breath, summoning every ounce of strength she had left. She had one chance to end this. She couldn't let fear win. "Get ready," Juno said, her voice cold and determined. "We end this now." The stellar fury shook as the psychic assault intensified. The ship groaned and shuddered under the force of the entity's power. The crew was barely holding on. The battle was reaching its peak. As the psychic entity launched its final, most devastating attack, Juno steeled herself. She wouldn't back down. She couldn't. This was their last stand. The final battle had begun. The stellar fury was nothing more than a ghost ship, its hull battered and broken, shaking violently as it struggled to hold together against the onslaught of psychic terror. The very air seemed thick with dread, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Captain Juno Black stood at the helm, her mind reeling with the weight of the choice before her. The psychic entity, once hidden in the shadows, now loomed in full, its form twisting and flickering in the air like a living nightmare. It had broken free from its prison, and now it was ready to consume everything in its path. The Hollow Armada, its fleet of fear-driven ships, hovered around the ship, waiting for the final command to tear everything apart. Juno's thoughts raced as she felt the entity's presence press against her mind. It wasn't just an alien force or a machine. It was fear itself, a creature born from the collective terror of all the civilizations it had consumed. It had already destroyed so many, and now Earth and the Outer Belt were next. But Juno wasn't about to let it win, not after everything they had been through. She had one last card to play, the Echo Stone. It was the key to stopping the entity, but it came at a price. The stone had power, immense power, but it could only be wielded by someone who could merge with it. The only way to truly destroy the psychic entity was to combine the stone's power with her own fear, using it as a weapon against the creature. The idea terrified her. To merge with the Echo Stone meant surrendering herself to its power. It meant sacrificing everything, her life, her crew, and the future they fought for. But if she didn't do it, the entity would destroy everything. The Hollow Armada would consume every planet, every colony. The galaxy would fall into eternal fear. Her crew was fighting as best they could, but they were no match for the entity. It was too powerful. The walls of the stellar fury were closing in, and the ship was on the brink of total collapse. They had no time left. "Captain," Vargas's voice cracked over the comms. "We can't hold on much longer. We need a plan. Now." Juno's eyes flickered to the crew, to her friends. She had led them through so many impossible situations, but this was different. This wasn't a battle of ships or guns. It was a battle of minds. The entity had no physical form, no weakness to exploit. It was pure fear. And she was the only one who could stop it. Juno took a deep breath, the weight of the decision pressing down on her chest. She looked at the Echo Stone, glowing ominously in front of her. The stone was a key, a prison, and a weapon all in one. It had been created to contain the entity, but now it was their only chance to stop it. She had to merge with it. The thought made her stomach turn. The stone's power was immense, but it came with a price. Once she merged with it, she would be bound to it. She would lose herself, become one with the fear, and there would be no going back. But as the ship's hull groaned, and the entity's voice echoed through her mind, Juno knew what she had to do. She had to take the risk. "Prepare for the final strike," Juno said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides. "I'm going in." "Captain." "No," Ray shouted. "You can't do it. We'll find another way." But Juno's mind was made up. There was no other way. If she didn't stop this, no one else could. She activated the Echo Stone, feeling its power surge through her. It was overwhelming. It pressed against her, fighting to take control. She could feel her own fears, the failures, the doubts, the losses, flooding her mind. It was like being trapped in her own nightmare. But she didn't let go. She fought back. She was Captain Juno Black. She wouldn't be broken by fear. As she merged with the stone, the world around her shifted. The stellar fury seemed to vanish, and she was surrounded by nothing but darkness. The entity was there, waiting for her. "You think you can stop me?" The voice boomed, cold and mocking. "You're just a human. You're nothing." Juno stood tall, her voice steady. "I am fear," she said, her words echoing in the void. "I am the one who faces you, and I will not be consumed." The entity roared, a terrible, ear-piercing sound that rattled her very soul. It lashed out at her, sending waves of psychic energy crashing into her mind. But Juno held firm. She focused on her fear, on the power of the Echo Stone, and for the first time, she understood what it meant to truly control fear. She wasn't running from it. She was using it. With a final desperate cry, the entity tried to push her away, but it was too late. Juno unleashed the full force of the stone, its power surging through her like lightning. The psychic entity screamed as it was pulled back into the rift, its form dissolving into the darkness from which it had come. The Hollow Armada crumbled. The ships, once powered by the entity's fear, fell silent and lifeless. They drifted aimlessly through space, their connection to the entity severed. Juno's vision blurred. The power of the stone was overwhelming, and she felt herself slipping away. But she knew she had done it. The entity was gone. The galaxy was safe. As the last echoes of the battle faded, Juno's final thoughts were of her crew. They had survived. They would rebuild. They would protect the outer belt from whatever came next. But as the rift closed and the stellar fury began to break apart, Captain Juno Black was lost to the void. Her crew had won, but at a great cost. In the days that followed, the surviving crew members gathered. They mourned their captain's loss, but they knew that she had sacrificed herself to save them all. The legacy of Captain Juno Black would live on in every mission they took, in every colony they protected. Fear would no longer control them. They would stand firm, just as their captain had. And as they watched the stars from the bridge of the stellar fury, they made a vow to honor Juno's memory and carry on her fight, guarding the galaxy from the horrors that lay in the dark corners of space. The galaxy would never forget the last echo of Captain Juno Black.